were part of a historical event that took place here. We're all blown in different ways to do different things at different times. You had a role to play in bringing a lot of people to a new possibility, which was the creation of an event to introduce and to bring together many new ideas. Looking back on that, what happened?
What happened? A lot of chaos. It was very much a ferment at the time, not just in Australia but globally. There'd been the student riots in Paris, various, Germaine Greer had published Female Eunuch, and there was a lot of consciousness in the air, a whiff of revolution in the air, if I can say it that way. So when Graham and I were charged with organising, Graham was the director, I was the producer in terms of my role as cultural director for the Australian Union of Students. When we were charged with putting on a festival, we thought, no, we don't want the model of the old-fashioned Adelaide and Sydney arts festivals. This needs to be a more radical model. It needs to take into account the nature of the times. So we deliberately sort of took it away from the city and university campuses. We looked for a country location, ideally on the coast, where people could buy the land and settle after the festival if they chose. We could never find the right property. There was always something lacking. Either the water supply wasn't good enough or the road access. Eventually we discovered Nimbin had been featured on the ABC as a dying town. And back then you could buy land for $1 an acre and rent houses for $10 a week. So we turned our thinking around and the festival became about recycling a town. Then Graham and I put a lot of energy, because I was doing a touring circuit. I'd often be in Perth on a Monday, Adelaide on a Tuesday, North Queensland by Friday. We would try and identify the movers and shakers, anyone doing something strong and original, whether it was a microbiotic restaurant or a poet or whatever. We would call them all to a meeting. We'd explain the festival concept to them. Usually then quite a lot of them would walk out the door muttering 60s hippie bullshit, and there'd be 10 people left saying, sounds great, what do you want us to do and when do we start? So we gradually collected a couple of hundred people who had dropped everything in their lives and come to Nimbin to help prepare the site and the festival. And as I say, there wasn't any models. There'd never been a festival like this before. People sometimes call it Australia's Woodstock, but it wasn't. It wasn't a pop festival. It was what we tried to do is to gather the best minds of our generation to focus on the challenges that we saw ahead. Challenges like climate change, overpopulation, etc., which back then were radical and very on the fringe, and which since have become mainstream. So Nimbin was an attempt to address some of those challenges. I think the fact that it's still here 50 years later, and someone like the Rainbow Power Company now, employs 40 people and 20 trucks doing alternative power. There are lots of signs that Nimbin didn't have all the answers, nobody ever does. But Nimbin has been an active ingredient. It's often called the countercultural capital of Australia now. And I think that is an apt legacy. And it's had an impact not just on Nimbin, but in fact on the whole Rainbow region and the north coast of New South Wales.
Sorry, it's still caught on that camera.
Right. So I should be looking this one.
Well, no, I was just trying to level up the picture a little bit.
So there was a festival, a philosophy behind the festival, if you like, and a lot of it was throwing out the old model of you sit in serried rows and look at sort of dance or music. One of our slogans was, there is no program, you are the festival. We encouraged people to come with that active sort of approach that, they were going to create the festival around them. We also encouraged them to come in self-sufficient tribal groups. We obviously, supplied things like toilets, food co-ops, etc. But we tried to encourage people to be as self-sufficient as possible. These were the days of the Whole Earth Catalogue and people putting their heads into sustainability, and we wanted that to, to be a major theme of the festival. Another theme was, we do not need to be sold our own culture. It was not a commercial festival, unlike most festivals. It didn't attempt to make money. The festival was free. We did charge people for parking in order to try and recoup a little bit of money for Australian Union of Students, but the whole concept was, it's a free festival and it's whatever you make it. And people coming with that attitude is what I think made it so different and so radical at the time.
The feeling here, when I arrived, I think I got here a few days before the start of it, and you'd actually sent me a ticket to fly from Bali to Brisbane.
Indeed.
And then I hitchhiked from Brisbane Airport to here, and I had no idea where I was going.
Yes, or what to.
I had no idea, no concepts at all.
Yeah.
And I landed in the middle of it, and there seemed a lot of people in the town.
Yes.
So it was really full of people.
Yes.
There were large numbers of people here. How many do you think?
Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000, because it wasn't ticketed. No one absolutely knows. And then there were kind of people who were here for the whole 10 days, and day visitors from Lismore who just come to see the naked breasts of the hippie girls. But the best estimate is 5,000 to 10,000. You could probably go in the middle and say maybe 7,500, okay. Which back then was these days you get 20 people at 20,000 at big festivals, but back then 7,500 was a substantial, and they came from all over Australia, in fact from all over the world.
Yes. The feeling at the time was it was like a magnificent adventure.
Yes.
Everybody was there, and it had a very clear feeling for me of being a crossroad.
Yes.
A meeting point, an important meeting point that I had no idea what the results or the purpose was, except that it was a meeting point.
Yes.
Did you have that feeling?
Yes, I did. As I say, part of Graham and my intention was to try and gather the best minds of our generation, and to an extent, I think we succeeded in that. And of course, when you gather that sort of group of people, you're going to have quite an interesting explosion of ideas and activity, etc., which we did. So I was very satisfied with it. The drug bust, of course, kind of cut across all that. For the few days before that, it was like paradise on earth. You walk through the fields, everyone was smiling and happy. Everyone wanted to greet you and share food, share a joint, share music. It was like, this is the ultimate. Life's not going to get much better than this.
Yes, there was that feeling.
Yes.
And it's here still.
Yes. Yes, I think the legacy of Nimbin is basically kind of a pretty unique town. I think Nimbin is now very special. Still has some of those qualities. It's not without its negatives. It's not perfect. Nothing ever is. But I think people, when they come to Nimbin, recognise that it's a pretty special place. The Aboriginal elders at the time told Graham and I that their attitude towards Nimbin was that it was a place of learning. They came to Nimbin to learn and to take away wisdom. And it's interesting that kind of, in its own way, we stumbled into that. And I think that sort of, those people who got the most from it did take away a little bit of learning and a little bit of wisdom.
The initial engagement with the First Nations people, the local, was that important?
It was.
For you?
Engagement with the First Nations people was important, particularly since in my entire sort of school career up till then, I had never met an Aboriginal person. As you probably know, there was one Aboriginal performer at the Arts Factory, Black Allen, and he was the only Aboriginal I knew. Yes. So in fact, when we decided that we would like to try and recycle a town, we held a town meeting with the townspeople. Virtually the entire town attended the meeting. The local policeman, Bob Marsh, couldn't be there, but sent a lovely letter saying, this is an opportunity we cannot afford to miss. and the town voted unanimously to host the festival. Then when Graham and I went back to AUS in Melbourne, the Union of Students, we were asked by some of the Aboriginal people, but have you asked the elders? And we said, oh, no, we haven't. So back up to Nimbin, sought out people like Richard Donnelly, Lyle Roberts, etc., who we were introduced to as the elders, explained to them what we were trying to do, and they gave us their blessing and said, yes, kind of, you know, we understand this, we're on side with it. So, but it was a little bit clumsy because, as I say, that was the first contact we'd ever had. There was no model. We weren't following it, we were just making it up as we went. But our hearts were in the right place, and I think a lot of people recognised that and forgave us some of our clumsiness.
Yeah, I think there was an opening here the other day, a walk in the country.
Yes.
And it was very much heartfelt.
Yes.
And the whole gathering was a heartfelt.
Yes.
That relationship has grown.
Yes.
Since then. Speak about that and the way in which it, perhaps your understanding of the First Nations people and the community growing together.
One of the things I've realised is that, as one might expect, I think, the local Bundjalung tribe was watching carefully what happened, was participating sometimes at an arm's distance, but parallel to the development of Nimbin, there's been sort of that development of the First Nations side of it, and in a very healthy way, I think. It's now, of course, much more visible. No one can say they've never met an Aboriginal, as back then you could. But I've become very aware that that there is that. Rhoda Roberts has been a great advisor to us, because when it comes to Aboriginal people, First Nations people, like any others, they're not one unified group. They have their own tribal ways, their own internecine rivalries, etc., etc. But Rhoda has been very good at advising us on the protocol. People like Gilbert, who's going to be doing I think did the opening ceremony the other day, smoking ceremony, very on side. Had lovely conversations with him where he said, we now regard you as brothers, and we're brothers in this enterprise together. So that relationship has grown. Interestingly, it was all very new back in 73. A Kalahari bushman from South Africa, Bar Stone, took it upon himself to invite and bring Aboriginal elders from all over Australia to the festival. And we did a welcome to country back then when they all arrived, which is acknowledged as the first contemporary welcome to country to be held in Australia, which of course now has become every meeting and every event in the country opens with a welcome to country. But that all goes back to the first one in 1973 in Nimbin. So one of the things I think Nimbin should be proud of. And now with the referendum on the voice coming up, I think even more important to, to acknowledge that the fact that the First Nations people were the original owners of the land and remain so, and to try and heal that, that terrible breach which happened as part of British colonialism, etc. We can't change the past, but we can go back and we can change the future. And I think that's kind of where we're at this point in time.
This particular gathering we're at right now, Aquarius 50, bringing many of the elders together.
Yes.
We have the elders dinner tonight.
Yes.
I'd like to sit next to you.
You'd like to?
Sit beside you.
Right.
So this coming together of elders now, what do you think of that?
It's something that coming together of the Aquarius elders and acknowledging particularly those no longer with us, because, so 73 was 50 years ago. Sadly, many of the key people, the key movers and shakers are no longer with us. So what we've put together tonight, we've identified a dozen of people, people who were very instrumental in terms of the architecture students building all the facilities, in terms of Paul Joseph as a music man, etc., etc. And we've matched them with a corresponding, currently alive elder, to acknowledge and celebrate their contribution to the festival. So in a way it's a little bit of a last hurrah. If if there is a 60th festival, I probably won't be around for it. But in a way, I think it's important at this point in time to acknowledge all those people, and then sort of, some of the key people who are still continuing with it, and people like Katie Corcutt, who for 50 years has kept the flame burning with an Aquarius event every year ever since the festival, and to acknowledge the role of many of those key players that we call Aquarius elders.
What is the role of the elders?
The role of the elders, what is the role of the elders? That's an interesting question. I think partly to impart their knowledge, experience and skills. All of those people that we've identified all brought a lot to it. They're all practitioners in their own field at a very high level, and brought students with them, brought energy with them. I mean, an example is Vernon Truique, who is known as the premier psychedelic artist in Australia. Vernon honed his skills in London during that whole psychedelic era, came out to Nimbin and took on the job of painting the town. Many people have continued it since, including the amazing Benny Zabel, but it was Vernon's insight that, and this town with its wonderful painted facades against the backdrop of the Nimbin rocks presents an unforgettable image. I think anyone who comes to Nimbin, that image is indelibly put into their brain probably forever. I was looking at a French internet site the other day, and there are all these pictures of the Nimbin main street with the rocks in the background. Even in France, people are recognising this as a pretty unique, special place.
It's original art. Original.
Yes.
So, the community's grown up here over the 50 years. You've been back many times.
Yes.
You've seen the young people appearing, the ones that are born here, the ones
Yes.
that are growing here. What do you have to say to them?
Really kind of the physical Nimbin community, I think, is one of the major legacies of the festival. And it's now had 50 years to mature and to grow. And as you say, not just one, but a couple of younger generations have come up. I would hope that they would look back with some joy and perhaps a little bit of reverence to what happened in '73, but that they would continue it. I'm not really interested in remembering the past just for the sake of waving a flag and saying we was here. I'm really only interested if it connects up with young people who can take it forward. I won't be here in another generation's time, they will. And if they don't pick it up, then eventually the impetus will die. So I would just say to them, this is a time for the handing on of the baton. If you're up for it, welcome to the task. And I'm finding many young people who are taking it on, and I'm sure we'll take it even further. And given the challenges that we all face globally at this point in time, we need as much of that as we can possibly muster.
From the heart.
From the heart.
Speak.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that was motivating me personally at the time were things like a book called The Population Explosion, which basically said that if we didn't control the numbers, there would end up being mass famines. The Club of Rome, who were a group of intellectuals in Europe who were saying, look, climate change is real and it's going to happen and it's going to be very threatening. And for me, there was always a tension between those things are dire threats to humanity, but then you had Buckminster Fuller and his colleagues saying technology will provide the solutions. But to me, there was always that tension between, the challenges, and technology has some ability, but technology is not absolute. I don't believe that all problems can be solved by technological advance. So that was what was motivating me. As I say, it was a bit fringe back in those days. Now it's become mainstream and it's talked about by, the United Nations and by all sorts of people in high places. Whether we're still up to the challenge, I don't know. Sometimes when I think into, 20, 30, 50 years into the future, I fear for the future of the planet and the people on it. But, hopefully some of that tension will be resolved. So from the heart, I just hope that Nimbin can contribute somewhat. As I say, I don't pretend that we have all the magical answers, that would be nonsense. But I do think that a lot of people here have given deep thought and commitment over decades to, how can we address some of these issues and how can we make for a better future.
And just one final thought. The spirit of the land, the spirit of the nation, the spirit of humanity. 1973, 2023. Is there a difference?
Is there a difference? 73 was a pretty amazing time. As I said, there'd been a ferment all around the world. The Whitlam government had come into power after 23 years of Conservative rule. And suddenly Graham and I could walk into the offices of senior ministers, get a welcome, they'd sit us down and say, how can we help? They were amazing times. And as I say, there was a whiff of revolution in the air. People were receptive back then and ready for some of the challenges that the festival offered. I think 50 years later, there's still some of that thinking, but there's also quite a bit of conservatism that reigns. Young people have to focus much more now on earning a living. Back then, as I say, you could buy land for $1 an acre and you could rent houses for $10 a week. You can't do that in Nimbin or anywhere else anymore. So young people have to face the dual challenge of contributing but also keeping themselves alive and keeping body and spirit together as they do so. So it is more challenging. In some ways it's more conservative, but I do think that it's time for the counterculture to rear its head again and say, look, we have not yet solved these challenges. Now is the time for Graham has a little bit of a slang, the hippies were right. And I think to a degree, the hippies were right. And we need to acknowledge that and to pick up on some of the things that the hippies had to offer. Namaste.